November 14th, 1970, a chartered airliner crashed short of Tri-State Airport in West Virginia. All 75 people were killed, including the Marshall University football team. We lost players, we lost coaches, we lost staff, lost community leaders, reporters, along with the crew from the airline. As you can imagine, the whole community was devastated. Marshall University is based in my hometown of Huntington, West Virginia. But Huntington, if anything, is resilient. The university and the community brought back the football program. It's received national recognition. Lives were brought back together. But that's not the only tragedy Huntington's had to overcome. Long before FEMA and organizations like it and the Great Flood of '37, half of our population was homeless. But we rebuilt. We've had to overcome in the economy the demise of manufacturing jobs, the downturn in the coal industry, but we're reinventing the economy. But in some ways, the toughest challenge we've ever had to do is the opioid crisis. I know a little bit about that. I spent 29 years in law enforcement. I actually retired and came back later as the chief of police. We're pretty proud of our record. We've been recognized as being innovative in short and long-term operations that have shut down drug trafficking organizations. We've got national recognition for drug market interventions, storefront operations that were led by Skip Holbrook, who is now the chief of police in Columbia, South Carolina. These were models for other communities. We had short-term operations that dealt with street-level operations. We arrested over 200 people in just a short amount of time. In those days, I felt the drug abuse problem we were containing. A community with strong law enforcement that had had record numbers of arrests between 2008 and 14. We had seized millions of dollars in drugs, cash, guns, stolen property. Felt like surely with that we were winning the drug war. Law enforcement had every right to be proud of its record. When the opioid crisis arrived in Huntington, I felt that same strategy would work again. Tough enforcement, seizures, arrest, incarceration. But as time passed, there were several incidents that made me question whether a law enforcement strategy alone would be successful. After retiring from law enforcement, I became an administrator at a correctional institution. I saw people, most of them coming in, had been sentenced for crimes they'd committed to fuel their addiction. I remember one young lady, about 20 years old, been sentenced exactly for those type of crimes. She seemed to have everything going for her. She worked in the commissary, was looking forward to her release. She was intelligent, good communication skills, loving family, university student. Shortly after her release, that addiction grabbed a hold of her again. And just a couple of months later, she was shot and killed by 2 Detroit drug dealers. And I wish that was the only thing that shook my conviction. But on a prom night at a local high school, 4 kids were shot and killed. And it shook the community to the core. And everyone understood the violence in the drug trade. I personally had 2 good family friends, didn't even know each other, separate times, died from the use of opioids. And these were not in that part of town that we talk about and those people. This was right here. I saw a young man at a city council meeting, talked about what treatment and recovery had done for his life, just as the city administration was about to cut funding to a very successful substance treatment center. It was a series of incidents like this that really began to make me question what we were doing. We began to look internally for what we were doing. We looked at the price of heroin. The price of heroin in the streets of Huntington was selling for twice the price that it was in our source city of Detroit. Spoke to the addiction our community had. We looked at arrest. We had arrested 400 people from the Detroit area, and they still kept coming. We had problems that law enforcement had never, ever experienced. It made us look even more. At a local hospital, 20% of our births had been exposed at birth by drugs. 15% had been diagnosed neonatal abstinence syndrome, NAS. Babies withdrawing, and it will rip your heart out when you see it. As I came back into law enforcement, I saw what was happening to our youth and how it was infecting the next generation. I saw 12 and 13-year-old kids carrying guns for older drug dealers. But I saw one drug raid that probably opened my eyes more than anything that I'd ever seen on the effects of youth. It was a drug raid at a convicted felon's home. Subsequent to the arrest, the search. There was a backpack. In that backpack was a gun and cash wrapped in a thick rubber band. But there was another backpack in that house. And in that backpack, there was a toy gun and play money wrapped in that same type of rubber band. But that backpack belonged to that convicted felon's 10-year-old son who was emulating his dad. We began to try to look at this and say, what has happened to our community? And you've got to understand, Huntington, West Virginia is a great community. It was voted this year America's best small community. And we were questioning, how did this happen to us? Well, one of the reasons we felt was the oversupply and overprescribing of opiates. Our county of 98,000 people had 40 million doses of opiates delivered between 2008 and 12. Really didn't sink into me until I realized 40 million doses of opiates, that's actually 40 million doses of synthetic heroin. One small community just the south of our border, population 382, had 12 million doses delivered. So obviously, what was the solution? We'd shut those pill mills down, and we shut them down. We shut them down hard, and we shut them down fast. But there were some unintended consequences. As we shut those down, the people that were addicted to opiates now fled to heroin. We know now that people that are using heroin today, 80% of them started out with that opioid prescription. Our public health people are very confident to give a conservative number of 98,000 people in our county. 10,000 are addicted to opiates and need treatment. You know, we can't build jails and prisons fast enough when you have that type of a scale and a number. And even if you could, you know, my experience shows people that are going in with that addiction, unfortunately, they come back out with that addiction. Well, Huntington has a history of comebacks, and we're determined to come back from this opioid crisis. We're going to define the opioid addiction in a way that will lead us to success. And our definition starts with recognizing opioid addiction is more than a criminal problem, that the addiction is a disease. our local government decided we were going to work locally to find answers, but we were going to partner with state and federal agencies. We had to get everyone in the community to bring all the resources together, not to just worry about the supply, but to worry about the treatment of people that were afflicted with addiction. As you can imagine, getting that kind of response is hard. A lot of communities have tried with just partial success, but Huntington's different. Huntington stepped up. In October of 2014, opened up the first neonatal abstinence syndrome treatment center, Lily's Place. You may have seen it in the news. The First Lady was there just a couple of weeks ago. And miracles are happening every day there with babies. Dr. Jerry Gilbert, president of Marshall University, not only supported us, but he made a commitment to build a center of excellence for addiction, not only for treatment, but also the research in it and prevention. Over 2,000 people now have been trained in screening and brief interventions and referred to treatment. Law enforcement, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, made a commitment to our community not only to fight the supply, but to fight the treatment and prevention to work on it. Had one official who worked out of the auspices of the White House Office of Drug Control Policy sat in my office and he said, "Jim, the data you are collecting, you've got a moral obligation to bring that out." Well, the DEA and that officials, which is high intensity drug trafficking area, committed serious resources, not only for supply, but for also treatment and prevention. As we begin to look at the public health problem, we were spending $100 million a year just on the public health. Had nothing to do with treatment, nothing to do with the criminal justice system. There were no harm reduction programs in the state of West Virginia at the time. So we had to go out and give information to every entity that we could. The faith community, politicians, educators, labor, management. And we talked to the faith community and we talked to them about their ministries, whether it be a clothing ministry or a food ministry or a youth athletic league. Those things had nothing to do with a person's spiritual life, but it gave them the opportunity to get those into their buildings and to have that conversation. Our harm reduction program that's run by the Cabell Huntington Health Department works on that same principle, not only to reduce harm, but to bring people in and talk about treatment and recovery. There's been some dramatic turnarounds. People have recovered. I'm happy to say we've had over 1,000 reversals by naloxone. Over 2,000 people are involved in the harm reduction program. We've seen people that were IV drug users, and I think of one lady who was so hopeless, her only answer was suicide. It failed. She's come back, and she has saved 17 people's lives now with naloxone. I believe we're going to see success by what we're doing in Huntington. Our goal is to reduce the hold of addiction. Yet law enforcement has to be part of the strategy. It includes successful and expanded drug courts, law enforcement assisted diversion programs. But fighting crime is only one part of a comprehensive approach. Today, the strategy includes engaging with people that have had multiple overdoses, getting them into treatment. An approach of dealing with mothers and babies from pregnancy to kindergarten and wrap all the services around it. A school system developing programs for babies that have been exposed at birth. Our strategy has been adopted around the state. Governor Jim Justice and the legislature created for the first time the State Office of Drug Control Policy. Curing the disease of addiction. It won't be easy. It may take many years. But if we see the problem for what it is, and if we respond by bringing every resource in local communities from every corner, we can start making our people whole again. And we can turn our fears into faith. And we will.